our internet connection, who art in cabling. Comcast be thy name. Please don't blow up my stream. Hi, everybody. So, for those of you who were here last week at the complete S show that was my stream, I found out what was going on, and I'll talk about that for a few seconds. We'll let people get through all the YouTube stuff, log in, get all that kind of stuff, right? Apparently, for the last week and a half, Comcast has been working on some wiring issues in my area in general. Yeah. So they've had all these really spotty coverage outages and weird nonsense. And that's what hit us, apparently, as they were not done fixing it. I had a very lengthy phone call with Comcast Saturday in the morning, because my internet went out randomly. It went out Wednesday night, Thursday night. And keep in mind, Friday night and Saturday morning, keep in mind, I'm trying to upload a video that I edited through this period of time, right? So the upload got interrupted several times to where I have to go manually re-kick it off during this. I actually got paranoid at one point that I would not be able to get the Saturday video that went out uploaded before it should, in theory, go live to the public. So that's fun, right? I mean, granted, I just delayed it, but it was just a nightmare. So I had a very lengthy phone call. It took forever, basically, to find out what was actually going on, because there was a lot of we're performing infrastructure maintenance, and it's great. Why am I losing connection randomly? That's not. Come on. It's just anyway. I'll answer one question real fast. I would bill Comcast for lost YouTube revenue. Oh, man. And the funny part about that, Steven, is that, the amount of credit they gave my account for a month worth of basically bad coverage was, nothing. Nothing in the grand scheme of things. It was that's cool. Thanks for the $25 credit to my account. I'm you sons of... But the problem is, the only decent internet connection where I live is Comcast. There is nothing else that has a reasonable download and upload rate other than Comcast in my area. And they won't let one of the other providers put fiber in my area because of an agreement with internet service providers in your area. Such bull. Anyway, I want to answer one question, then we'll get on the topic. So... VB23, which you've been watching the channel for an eternity. We talk every once in a while. Good to see you, buddy. What do you feel about the recent YouTube videos about doing less water changes? I think in many cases, some people leave out the really critical information or don't directly explain why. So Steenfott did one with his friend Danny, and she explained why she's not doing as many water changes, but I don't think she hit the nail on the head of exactly why you were able to do that. And mostly it's because a lot of her tanks are planted, so they're handling a lot of the problems, and she doesn't do heavy fertilizer loads, right? And Bob talked about EI dosing, and that's part of the reason why they suggest a 50% water change weekly in that situation. But there's a lot of room for nuance that's not included there. And I think in a similar vein, although it was about a planted tank, but not necessarily about less water changes, Jay Wilson was doing a stream, and I caught part of it, and I was kind of giving him a little bit of sass in chat. But Jay, if you for ever any reason you actually watch this, hi buddy, it was fun sassing with you a little bit. But he kind of hit on that. A lot of times when people, and sometimes social media is definitely at fault for this, try to help other people, they don't ask the right questions in the first place. They make too many assumptions, and I think that's part of it, is when we look at videos do less water changes or whatever, are we sure we're asking mentally as we watch the video the right questions about our own water? Because our source water matters so much about what we can and can't do. And that's probably worthy of a video, or maybe even like maybe I'll talk about it next week. Maybe that'll be next week's topic, because I think it's a good topic, because there's a lot of room and nuance to this, right? But in general, I think people have the right goal in mind. They just might not get the right details. They have lots of the pieces of the puzzle, but not the whole puzzle. And it's not that they don't know why. It's that they might think so locally about only their own style of water that they're forgetting certain things that they need to mention to account for a more wide variety of parameters. That's kind of my thoughts. So, let's talk the topic. Let's get into that. And this will be kind of another one of those semi-philosophical things. And by all means, for those of you who are live in the chat, and later for folks watching the replay in comments, feel free to ask questions, but or bring your own perspective to this. So, I asked, is challenging ourselves good for the aquarium hobby? And part of what spawned this conversation is, for the first time, to my knowledge, in my plant keeping hobby, I have successfully grown a fully submerged cryptocoryne flower spathe. And for those that don't know, crypts, when they flower underwater, they have a spathe. That's what the growth is called. And there's basically a protective shell surrounding the flower, and you literally have to cut it open to see the flower inside. In the wild, when they're immersed, not fully submerged, part of that spathe will go away and the flower will get exposed temporarily. But many times, water changes so much in the areas where they grow naturally that those flowers don't necessarily get to ever be visible unless you go get the spathe and cut it open. And that's actually the proper way to identify a cryptocoryne, if you didn't know. To truly know which species of cryptocoryne you have, is you have to be able to flower it and cut it open and look at the flower inside the spathe. It's the only way to actually properly identify crypts. And that's something I learned from Karen Randall, from a talk that she gave at my local club. Interesting little thing, right? A lot of times you can assume you know what it is, but you actually cannot properly know what a crypt is for certain without getting it to flower and then cutting the spathe open and looking at the flower inside. Little interesting things you learn along the way, right? So, I have long preached that I love to challenge myself. But I'm going to play devil's advocate for a minute here. Okay? I think personally that when we challenge ourselves, it helps us grow as hobbyists. But I'm going to play the opposite side for a moment. I want us to talk about this philosophical side of things, right? When we challenge ourselves, especially with fish, we're usually keeping something we've never kept before, or something that's difficult to keep. Maybe we're trying to breed a fish that no one's ever bred, or very few people have ever bred, and the fish is naturally challenging, or the fry is challenging. Are we actually doing something good for the hobby, given that we're potentially putting these fish into effectively environments being kept by people who don't know how to keep them, or don't know how to do the thing they're trying to do? Is that actually good for the hobby, right? You could think about several of the people like Jeremy Bosch, for example. Jeremy Bosch, if you're not familiar with him, he's a catfish specialist, right? Rico Stan making comments in chat. Don't make me laugh when I'm trying to be serious here, dang it. But he's a guy who's like one of the first in the U.S. to breed a lot of the whiptail cats and a lot of very cool catfish, right? Loricariidae, if you want to go like full scientific. And you've got super experts like him. They're specialists that they'll try to breed fish or keep fish that no one else has ever kept before in captivity. right? And we can go deep back. We look at like when I talked about the angelfish video, we talked about the people who kept them all the way back in the teens and stuff and got them to breed in captivity. And we would have to say to ourselves, of course that's good for the hobby. Then we learned over time how to keep angelfish. But the question could become, for some of these fish, let's say it's a fish that is naturally endangered. Are we risking their population by trying to keep them in the hobby? Right? And a lot of times, many people who maybe are not as skilled, I tend to think it's more just they haven't had the experience, but some people will say skilled. I think it's experience, will take on the challenge of certain fish, and in the end it usually results in that fish either not having a very good life or dying. This isn't always the case, of course, but I want to think about that side of things, right? Do we think that that is good for the hobby? Just think about that. Put that in your mind for a sec. Completely, like, this is something to think about, as I'm going to now go flip the opposite side and give you my true opinion. Right? My personal opinion is yes. Challenging ourselves is definitely good for the hobby, because we learn, in many cases, what we can and can't do with a fish, a plant, and ways that we can maybe expand on what we assume to be truth. You know, some people will say, well, you can only breed that fish in hyperacidic water. You have to have tons of tannins. You're probably going to need to use peat moss to buffer the pH down. And then you'll find some person who's bred like an angelfish in 8.0 pH, right? And they're just like a Leopoldi or a Scalari, something that's very close to its wild nature, not something like deep down the genetic lines where you've played with the genetics and stuff. More simple things. Or you have lots of the Gideids, many rainbow fish species, cichlid species that are extinct in the wild, and if it were not for hobbyists, they would be extinct, period. If it were not for hobbyists challenging themselves and trying to keep this fish that was endangered or at critical levels in order to breed more of these fish, they'd be gone. In the case of plants, I think that that's usually where I challenge myself, is plants. I don't typically challenge myself too much with fish, mostly because I stick to a wheelhouse I know pretty well. And I'm not really branching like way outside that wheelhouse to anything crazy hard. Although apparently basic shrimp keeping is impossible for someone like me. But, you know, like, I will challenge myself with plants because often I'm trying to see if some of the assumptions of like, you have to have CO2 or this plant has to have X, is that true, or is it just that person's experience, and we can broaden the understanding of some of these things by doing them different in different areas, giving more data, more information to make sure that people are armed with more than just one singular assumption. So, to me, challenging ourselves is very important. Now, we don't want everybody to just like, I've been in the hobby for 6 months. Time to keep that really rare, or that challenge myself with something extremely hard. I think that could be bad for the hobby, because you could get those people who get disheartened when they fail. And maybe they just don't have enough experience knowing that, like, hey, you really ease yourself into these things before you just go straight to the hardest thing possible. And that could dishearten people, think, oh, maybe I'm just not a good fish keeper, instead of just knowing, like, no, you just need more time understanding fish keeping as a whole before you start diving into the challenges. You step up in smaller challenges. First, you start with, like, the guppy. Then you move to, like, a corridora or some kind of, like, pleco or some other, like, kind of easy to spawn, but not like just Not like live bearers per se, where they just do it on their own completely. Regardless of what you do, you could almost keep them in like terrible conditions and they'll just reproduce anyway, right? You slowly take little challenges before you go to those bigger leaps, right? You slowly up your game, grow your understand that like, oh, certain fish tend to spawn in nature after big rain showers, and usually when a rain shower happens, that water is cooler than the water system they live in. So if a sudden temperature drop by a certain number of degrees occurs, it can make the fish think, oh, it's flood season, it's time to breed, right? This is something that we very commonly do with a lot of our plecostomus species. We do this with almost all the corydoras. You've got other fish like rainbow fish that just are like, am I happy and did I just have food? It is time, right? You've got a wide array of things that as we slowly gain more and more experience, and sometimes we accidentally breed a fish and then we go and we try to figure out, well, what am I doing right? They're clearly happy enough. So what am I doing right? And we figure that out and we go, oh, let me see if I can replicate that. And we replicate it a few times, and that gives us that confidence. And now we know what's going on. Maybe we can go to that slightly harder challenge. And I think that's where challenging ourselves is extremely good, because we're slowly upping our game and making ourselves better and better aquarists, right? We're increasing our knowledge over time, and time is the key thing. I think challenges are about patience. It is really, really important that we don't expect now, right? I think that's one of the biggest problems. Is a lot of us expect instant results, and there are certain fish you definitely will never get that with. Zebra plecos, you will not instantly get results with them. They take 3.5 years to become sexually mature. It's one of those things. Like, sometimes patience is your best friend, and as long as you be diligent, you will eventually succeed in your goal. And then when you succeed and you replicate that a couple of times, now, okay, I know I can do this, and here's how I did it, and here's what you've learned over that period of time. How do I apply that to the next, I've kept a lot of guppies. Maybe your Fancy Tail Aquatics, who's in chat, just hit 1,000 subscribers. Congratulations, buddy. You're a guppy specialist, but maybe you're like, I want one tank of I'm gonna try and breed tetras, right? I'm gonna breed rummy nose tetras, or I'm gonna breed emperor tetras. Something that's a little different. That's my personal challenge. Like, I'm mostly a guppy keeper, or like for me, I'm mostly a rainbow fish keeper, but like, I want to breed a couple species of plecostomus, right? Those are the things that I look at, and I think that's where challenging ourselves is good. So I'd love to hear from you guys in chat. I mean, a lot of you have had some great stuff, but just what you think about those two different arguments, right? Clearly, I'm in the yes, challenges are good market, but we have to play a little bit of devil's advocate to make sure that we're not looking only at the side we want to believe. We have to look at both sides and make sure that we know for certain that the positives drastically outweigh the negatives, or vice versa. What we're looking at when we're making major decisions or forming opinions in our hobby, right? It's important to weigh both sides of the coin. Otherwise, you're kind of spoiling yourself and basically just feeding into something you hope, as opposed to making an educated decision. Cool. All right, so I got a few. I'm gonna bounce through some comments, and then we'll get to the questions. As always, guys, at Bentley Pasco makes it super easy for me to see things. And then, if I don't happen to answer your question, bentley.pasco@gmail.com is my email. You're welcome to email me. Let's go through a few wonderful comments, and then we'll hit the questions. Kyle's aquarimetrics. I'm glad the fish tube fad is now on topics that help the hobby instead of just on shorts. Well, I mean, the thing is, YouTube made shorts, really positive for your discovery, not necessarily for, your monetization, but for discovery. So it behooved a lot of people to do shorts because they waited expressing or showing you to new people heavily on shorts, which is just sucks. It's just the way they try to push new features when they're trying to compete with other platforms. Mike Kinseth, I've never been able to flower a plant in water. It took me a long time before I got my first flowers, honestly. It was probably 2 years, I think, before I got my first flowers, and those were on some Bacopa, which Bacopa is, like, really easy to flower, and for the first, like, year and a half that I had some Bacopa, I didn't flower it. It took time for me to get flowers going, and part of it was just understanding what I needed to allow the plants to do in order to get flowers, which for the most part means they have to grow out of water. Very few plants will actually flower underwater. There's a small list, but it's very limited. Like, basically the easiest is Boos. And you could accidentally flower, like, Anubias every once in a while. But, like, truly trying to make flowers happen on purpose, it took me a while to do that too. So I wouldn't get too disheartened about that. VB, challenge for me is dealing or experiencing something new in the hobby. Change is inherent to the hobby. Nature is constantly changing. So if challenge is something new and a change, then it is good. I would generally say that for the most part, you want positive changes. There are plenty of negative changes that could occur, but yeah, I think for the most part, like when the hobby changes, it's usually for the better. It's typically not for the worse these days, just because information is so prevalent, right? And I think that's a good way to look at it. Fishy Mailman is lurking, doing water changes. Rico Stan, hi buddy. No question, just wanted you to say my name. Say my name, say my name. By the way, I hate that song, just letting you know. And it's not that. I think it's just there's certain pop music that is really overproduced that I just can't stand. However, the people who manufacture a lot of the beats for some of those bands, like especially like whoever manufactures most of the beats for Beyonce, those people are like playing some like 4D musical chess. They're just geniuses at what they do because it's so catchy and hooky. It's hard not to like get pulled in. I would be, as funny as it is to say, so for like there are several artists in pop, and like I'm mostly a rock listener personally, but I've listened to a lot of things. I've DJ'd, I've worked for a jazz radio station. I appreciate a lot of forms of music, mostly in newer age pop, so like late 90s forward for the most part for me, which just dates how old I am. The people who write a lot of the beats and the background music are very, very smart. And I would honestly be more interested in hearing those with no lyrics than the full songs as they are usually presented to you in the radio or wherever else you digest your music. You know, I guess streaming services, etc. Yeah, a little insight into how my brain functions. Justin Mosley, if we don't attempt new things, we never learn, period. It's very true. I'm not saying this should be the case with new hobbyists, but it's how we evolve. Yeah, and I think like there's a difference between trying something new and like actively challenging yourself. So trying to take on something harder on purpose versus just doing something new. Because like you can get a hobbyist who comes into play and like, well, I've never had a fish tank before. I want to try this. You'd be like, okay, let's give you something simple. And start them with something that's fairly hardy. You could look at like platies, mollies, guppies, white clouds, rice fish. You know, a lot of these fish that we know are pretty tolerant of some mistakes, right? They're not something that's super fragile. And that's different than say like, okay, you know, I've kept a tank of guppies for a little while. I think I want to get into keeping and breeding woodcats. Right? Very, very different. Or like I've kept African cichlids for a little while because I have really hard water. I want to go keep discus. And getting a wild discus especially. Right? Where I want to keep something that's naturally in like fairly soft, sometimes acidic water. You know, very, very, very different than what our experience is, and like not easing your way into go, okay, let me start with something like tetras or angelfish, and get used to a little bit softer water and how those species work, or maybe keeping like Stenkar discus, right, where like you have hard water, they're used to hard water, using those kind of fish to keep them instead of like going, I'm gonna go straight to wild discus. Like, there's some challenges there. But then again, I've had plenty of people that tell me that they feel the wild discus are more hearty than a lot of the like line bred discus. That's what my brain just was like, I don't know the word we want to say. But like, you think of like say like Jack Watley, right? You know, you've got all these beautiful, wonderful discus. They do phenomenal work. They're some of the best discus people in the United States. But the requirements for keeping those discus are significantly different than, say, like a Stenkar discus or wild discus, right? There's very big differences in them. And if you're not thinking about them ahead of time, and you're just gonna like, I'm gonna wholeheartedly challenge myself, I'm just gonna go do this thing, it could be really tough. All right. So with that thing, thank you, chat. It's good interacting with you guys. We're gonna slam into the questions. Actually, I'll do this one last one because it's about the question, but also related. From Joe Davis, what will be your next challenge that you take on? So I'm assuming that is not related at my work. It's a bad joke. As far as fish are concerned, the next thing I want to do is when I can get my fish room done, I want to breed at least one species of Corydora that's a little less common. So in my case, I would be looking at either a Dulphoi or Duplicarius, or one of the Venezuelan Cories. So like either the blacks or the orange. Now, granted, those are in the end still, what is it, Corydora Xenaeus, right? They're still bronze Cories. They're just different color variations of the bronze Cory, but they're a little there's some small nuance differences that make them slightly harder to breed. I put this in big quotation marks. I live in naturally soft water, which makes Corydoras pretty easy, but just I'm used to rainbow fish and guppies and a little bit with like bristlenose plecos. So there is a big difference in what you need to do to properly breed Corydoras reliably that I would have to learn, right? It would be a challenge for me, and it's not a big challenge, but it's still a challenge because there's some differences that I need to develop and master inside my own aquariums, right? And that would be probably my next like fish related challenge, is trying to breed those on top of what I know I can breed. Plant related, I have a how do I put this? I'm trying to basically get to where I can flower almost any species of flowerable plant at will. So I have like lots of different species of boosts. I'm trying to make sure that I flower every one of those multiple times, mind you. I want to be able to do it multiple times because that tells me that I can repeatedly do it. And each one kind of requires some slight differences. There's several species of crypt that I've never flowered that I'd like to flower, and a lot of this just plays into like further horticulture award points for myself and like doing dumb stuff in my club. But those are the things that are challenging to me. And then I guess technically I've never carpeted a tank fully, like full carpet for the full area I want, with something like Monte Carlo or dwarf baby tears or one of those very small fine leaf plants. Utricularia graminifolia would be another one. I probably want to do Monte Carlo because I'm in a water system where there's like no calcium naturally in the water. So it's more of a challenge to actually do that plant than it is for a lot of other people. It's just, those are a couple of the challenges that I have for myself. Like, I'd like to carpet a tank with that particular species. I've carpeted with other species pretty easily. I've never done super well with Monte Carlo, and I've never done super well with Ludwigia Tornado. That plant just freaking hates me. But yeah, those would be like my challenges. It's like master those things, right? Because they're the things that have been tough for me in the past. All right, we'll dive into. There's one question like pretty early I want to grab that was good. As I like pronounce that all weird. It's just what I do. Gary Duncan, what is the best way to plant Pogostemon stellatus octopus? So First off, make sure that your Pogestamon has adapted to your water. And the way that I like doing that is either if it's in a pot, I leave it in the pot. If it's a bundle, I just have a plant weight around it. I leave it in my water system until I see new roots start developing and I have some new growth on top. I just want to make sure it's converted to my water and ready before I plant it in the substrate. And then pretty simply, I like planting it just straight down. And I try to plant the stem relatively deep. So if I have, say, 3 inches of substrate, I'm trying to plant it all the way to the bottom. Now, granted, if the stem I have isn't tall enough to do that, then, I want to go at least 2 inches of substrate down. Now, if I have like 4 or 5 inches of substrate, I'm probably going to plant it 2 to 3 inches down. And what I want to do is establish lots of room to have a really robust root structure. Because the more robust the root structure is for that plant, the better it's going to be long term. Now, granted, with a stem that's as aggressive a grower like Stellatus octopus, you don't really need to go that hardcore because you're going to be trimming and replacing it a lot. But that's a personal preference. I do that with almost every stem. There's very few stems I don't give that treatment to. And basically it just comes to, it has to be a stem that's either not very long to begin with or is very fragile. So an example would be something like Rotala willickii, where it has a very thin stem and lots of very super fine leaves. That's when I tend to not plant quite as deep, because there's a little bit more risk that that particular plant will receive some kind of damage when I'm doing that, and that can cause rot down in the root structure, and that can be really bad for your plant. But for something like a Pogestamon, where it has a much more robust stem and root structure, yeah, I tend to go like 2 to 3 inches of substrate down is what I'm shooting for, just because it roots the plant very firmly, makes sure it's not going to randomly pop up, and allows it to grow a very, very robust root structure so that that plant really anchors itself in, grows really well, and does well. Ryan Mailing. New floors being installed in our house. Need to move a 75-gallon planted tank a few feet for installers, then back in place. Can I drain almost all the water and move the tank and sand together? Yes. So the way that I would do this is, one, if you have livestock in there, you're gonna have to get your livestock out. Any big livestock, because there's some certain risk with having very little water in there, where when it kind of sloshes around when you're moving it, that you can risk hurting your fish. But what you basically want to do is drain it down, make sure that everything stays kind of wet, and I would like saran wrap the top of the tank. What you're trying to do is hold the moisture in so that those plants stay wet. And you could do this by like just misting your plants really, really thoroughly right before you put that saran wrap on top. That way it stays pretty moist inside there. That's just going to help your plants stay healthy for that period of time. You don't want them to dry out. The worst thing in the world is your plants drying out completely, with the exception of a few species. And then from there, it's just, shift the tank carefully and slowly. Let them do their work, then shift it back carefully and slowly. Let them finish up, refill your tank, and you're good to go. I would personally get my fish and just like move them out into a bucket or something like that if you can, and aerate that bucket. You should be able to keep temperature throughout the course of a day to where it doesn't get too low, unless you're keeping something like German blue rams or something that really needs a lot of warmth. And then what I would look at doing is just like get yourself a small 10-gallon tank you can put somewhere else with a heater, and temporarily, like a quarantine tank, set it up to house those fish for a little bit, and just see if you can borrow one from a friend or buy one at $1 per gallon sale, whatever. If you got a spare one lying around, if you don't, just use a bucket. It's enough, and you're going to be okay. Pretty easy. Just takes a little bit of extra labor is really all it comes down to. Yeah, that's really all you're looking at. And chat jumps as I slowly catch up. Excellent. Paul Soltero. Using that method, I've been able to keep the pH in my 40 breeder crib tank at 7.4 pH instead of 6 to 6.4. Now snails don't melt, and I feel comfortable trying Goodeids. Whoa, I feel like I missed something. Oh, that's why. I found that if I want to increase pH of my soft acidic water to keep it stable, is to add aragonite to the filter and some small pieces of limestone to the rockwork. Yeah, I do crushed coral in my filter just because it's really easy to get crushed coral out here, as opposed to aragonite necessarily in proper chunks that I like. But that's just because Aquarium Co-op brings in crushed coral all the time, makes it really simple. Yeah. But yeah, no, I think it's really good to do it that way. The other people that can do it is you use like something like calcium carbonate, potassium carbonate, or even sodium bicarbonate, or other ways to kind of buffer your water very easily. I personally just like something that's a little bit more simple. VB23. Anyone here find it annoying that everyone acts like Extreme is the only good food now? I don't think that so in my case, I don't feel like Extreme is the only good food. I have had really good results with it, and it's something I can easily get locally. So instead of like trying to track down New Life Spectrum, Northfin, like pick whatever a lot of people tend to love, it's much easier for me to go to the Aquarium Co-op and buy Extreme, which I know is a good food. And more particularly, rainbows need a really high protein content to begin with, compared to other fish. So like where most fish do well with like 40% protein, rainbows really want to be like 65. They eat a lot of insects and stuff in nature to where they have a naturally higher protein diet. So it's good to have like things like that krill flake. They go bonkers for that stuff. And it's just something that I personally like. Do I think it is the only food I should ever use? No, I use multiple different foods. I use Fluval Bug Bites Flake and Bug Bites. I use a bunch of Extreme stuff. I'm thankful that like Extreme likes my feedback enough that they send me stuff to test every once in a while and just give us honest feedback. And there's been a couple times where I've been like, yeah, this is not good. Or at least not. It's been more like, yeah, this is not getting the reaction that like a different product using similar ingredients is getting. And they go, okay, we're going back to the drawing board. Right? I mean, it's really cool that they directly pay attention to our feedback. We're like, if I were to buy food from New Life Spectrum and do a review, they wouldn't care what I said. They wouldn't care. You know, like a lot of these big companies, they don't, if I tell them like, hey, when I feed this food that you advertise is good for my plecos, and I don't give them something else in there, they start to get bloated. They wouldn't care. They'd just be like, oh, you're probably feeding them too much. Or they'd say some nonsense. We're like, or they just say nothing at all, which is more likely. We're Extreme, I give them that kind of feedback, and they're like, well, do you think if we make this small adjustment here, and that adds a little bit of this, that is basically unnoticeable, that it would be less likely to have that issue occur? Like, think about the difference between those things. I think that's part of why a lot of us like Extreme, is that for those of us who are fortunate enough, and I'll be clear, they'd be fortunate enough that Extreme like talks to us back and forth about our feedback on things, they pay attention to feedback. They want people to make their product better, and their product's really good to begin with. So it's kind of a refreshing thing where a lot of us love it. And there's some people who are in just certain circles where they're sponsored by Extreme. They're not sponsored by somebody else. So of course they're going to only talk about the thing they're sponsored by. But it doesn't mean that it's the only good food. It's just the good food we all have easy access to and we all like. But I use a bunch of Hikari frozen food. I use Fluval Bug Bites. I've got this like brine shrimp flake from this like random company that is out in Germany called Premium Food, which I guarantee you've probably never heard of, and it's carried by a friend of mine who owns a small business, doing mostly like plecos and some dry goods. I've tried like all sorts of different like shrimp related foods, the Hikari Vibra Bites, and I like a lot of these things, right? Sarah old ONIP tabs, I love those things to death, but I can't get them anymore. There's a ton of stuff I love, but it's just a matter of like what works the best for me and is also a high quality product, and that's just what I use the most of, which right now, that's Extreme. It's just the truth, but I mix in a bunch of stuff because I believe a varied diet is far more important than just like, this is the best food, feed only this. Like, that's just stupid. We don't eat only one thing. You don't eat only a hamburger from this one restaurant or only a pizza from this one place for all your meals. So clearly we need to vary the diet for our other pets too, right? There has to be something else in there. Ooh, Rick. Is it just Rick? Oh, Rich. Rich. Click. That's gonna mess with me. My new challenge is going from a 65 to 180 with a sump. Ooh. Any advice about the sump? There are far better people to learn about sumps from than me. And that's just me saying that there are people with far more experience. I like sumps a lot. The big thing is just making sure that you have a reliable pump and that you have reliable power. Because when you have power outages, if you don't have the right, basically mechanisms installed to make sure that the water doesn't just keep flowing down in there, and that you can handle a certain amount of stuff before you overflood your sump, that's something to pay attention to. Is like how far do your overflows go before they stop draining, and can your sump handle that much water? And designing your system to handle that, right? That'd be my biggest piece of advice. But like somebody like Corvus Oskin, Joel has been using sumps forever, and that would be a person I would go for sump advice. That's actually who I personally go to for sump advice. But I would look at somebody like him. There's saltwater keepers have tons of experience with sumps. You could go to them and just apply some of the understanding to freshwater, because it works just the same, just you're not using the same equipment. It's pretty straightforward, pretty easy. The only other thing I would suggest is for your plumbing, when you do your plumbing, make sure that it's obvious to know for you, just looking at your plumbing at any time, that this is my drain line and this is my fill. In the sense of the water that is coming down into the sump, whatever tubes are those, make them easily defined and marked so that when you're tracing them, should you ever have a problem or a leak, you know that you're tracing that one pipe the whole time simply and what that pipe is for. And usually people do this with like colored PVC. You don't have to go that crazy. You could literally just like Sharpie a black line on one and a red or blue line on another, and you'd be fine, right? There's easier ways to do it, but that'd be my like 2 sets of advice for you. I hope that helps. I hope it helps. Mickey M, one music producer to check up is Max Martin. You will be surprised at how many hit songs he's produced. I know who Max Martin is. and yeah, you're correct. I mean, there's a lot of people that have done a ton of stuff that like you don't know. Like they're not like, say, Rick Rubin, where they're these massive names in the industry. But yeah, he's done a lot of stuff. David Hahn. Put lots of ammonia in my tank a year ago for an experiment. Plants melted. Now Amazon swords leaves get to about 4 inches. Then the plant makes a new one. At least 30 leaves now. Ideas. So, I'm curious what you're trying to ask. So, is it just like why it keeps growing a new leaf before the leaves get huge? That's just how plants grow. Or is it more that it's staying compact the entire time and not growing tall, and you're trying to understand why it's not growing tall? The easiest way to get a lot of plants to grow taller is to give them more red light and less blue light. If you provide quite a lot of blue light, you're actually going to naturally cause the plant to grow more compact. If you provide more red light, it will naturally grow taller and more broad, large, robust, but just larger leafage in general with more red and orange toned light. So if you're looking at your light spectrum and you have just a white and blue light, you're probably going to have more compact plants. If you have a light that has a lot more red, and you can control it, turn your blues down a little bit and turn your reds up. It'll look a little different, but it'll help those plants get larger foliage. But if you're getting lots and lots of new leaves, that just means the plant's healthy. I wouldn't worry. Like one thing I've noticed also with Amazon swords specifically is they'll grow kind of compact for a while and grow lots of new leaves, and then all of them will slowly start growing tall. It's kind of like the plant wants to naturally bush out a certain amount, and then it just starts growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And I don't have any that's just purely observational from several Amazon swords I've grown, and I learned that there's a point I can keep them to only be so tall and get really big, and then I can sell them, and they sell for really good money because people are like, this thing's amazing, it's all you're converting, it's huge. uh, before they started growing so tall that people were like, this thing's too tall, it won't fit in my tank. So it's like random tricks of the trade you pick up when you're doing stuff. Joe Davis, the biggest challenge is convincing your better half that this new tank is absolutely necessary for keeping the feng shui balance. Oh man, I feel weird. I'm gonna give a shout out to my lady at this point because I've talked to a lot of friends, and I consider most of you friends, by the way, if you don't know that. But I talked to a lot of friends of the hobby, and they're like, yeah, it's hard to convince my wife to let me have another tank. And I know that I could go to my lady and just be like, hey, I'm putting up a new fish tank. And she'd be like, all right. Like, she's almost more excited for me to be able to do, like, my garage fish room than I am, because she wants to see what I'm going to do. Because we've had, like, long conversations about what I want to do and why I want to free up some rooms in the house so that we can, like, have some other rooms to do some stuff, like, for her, or just, like, making maintenance easier on myself, things like that. And I've described a lot of, like, what my plans are to her, and things I'm specifically doing to, like, keep YouTube and filming in mind while also making my fish room really effective at being a fish room. And it's just like things that get her really excited. And she's like, yeah, I can't wait to see what you do. And it's so funny because at times she seems more jazzed about it than I am when I'm explaining things, because I'm explaining it like super factual and like planned and methodical. And she's like all excited listening to me. It's so funny. I feel really blessed that my lady is like, just like, fish make him happy. Let him do his fish thing. Right? She knows that, like, I'm coming home and I've got so much fish stuff or whatever that I need to do. It's not like I'm going anywhere. It's not like I'm going to run around on her or anything. But yeah, there's so many people, like, they've got that thing where, like, you know, the significant other in their life is like, I don't really want another fish tank in the house, or this is already taking up so much space. And I kind of feel bad about that because, you know, I'm kind of blessed where my lady's just like, yeah, 2 rooms in the house are taken up by fish tanks. There's a fish tank in our living room. There's fish tanks in our bedroom. I like them all. It's like, gotta keep her. Oh, man. All right, back to questions. I know I'm ranting and raving too much. Silent Water 81. I have very, very hard water. RO is too expensive. How can I safely lower pH for pistos? Chemicals, botanicals. So botanicals is probably your easiest route. Honestly, like, one thing I would suggest, Silent Water, is look at, like, your local Craigslist, your local OfferUp. You know, there's a few others like that. Try to find somebody who sells off an old used RO system. Because I've seen, and maybe I'm lucky in where I'm at, and just there's a lot of fish keepers out in the Seattle area in general, and it's a big area, but I've seen plenty of stuff even like where my mom lives on the other side of the state where there's not as much fish keeping, where people are selling like RO units dirt cheap. Like, you can get a relatively lightly used RO unit for like $50. And you're done. Where, like, those chemicals will cost you more over time, right? If you think about it, like, if we're constantly using chemicals or botanicals or all this stuff, they cost you over time. And eventually they will cost you as much, if not more, than the RO long term. One of the easiest things, though, I will say is if you learn how to do it effectively, do a lot of research before you dive into this, but look at peat moss. Peat moss is used quite a lot to acidify and add tannins to waters. You know, peat bogs are really acidic, so peat just naturally kind of helps with that. Do your research, though. Be really thorough, because you can very quickly run into trouble if you don't do it right. And then other than that, yeah, you can do lots of botanicals. There's like literally almost the next comment. It's 2 later from Eric Wyrock. Said, thank you for recommending Tannin Aquatics, which is who I recommend if you want to go get botanicals. Scott is fantastic. And as Eric said, he took great care of me, got me set up. Great. Yeah, I like Scott a ton. When he came and spoke at my club, like, I had lots of questions for him. I sat and talked with him for, I think it was like 45 minutes after his talk. Like, he was a super nice dude. He's like very passionate about the hobby, because he used to do salt and was a big like coral distribution guy, and then got into blackwater tanks. So it's his like perspective on the hobby is really, really interesting. So you can do botanicals, and botanicals can be very effective, but peat is probably the most effective if you have very hard water. Just make sure you do your research first, because you can go bad really, really fast. And peat is not finicky, but it's more like it can be very potent, so you can kind of accidentally overdose your tank, if you will, with peat moss and just spike it way low. So just be prepared for that. Carrie Phillips, do you use CO2 to lower pH? I use CO2 in very low amounts, so really the amount of pH change that's happening isn't very high. You could use CO2 to lower pH, but you have to turn the CO2 off at some point, and you need plants to consume that CO2, or you risk hurting the fish. So it's not a great solution if you absolutely need to have lower pH for pistos. But that being said, certain pistos can handle hard water better than others, and you might look at doing those type of pistos to begin with, while you potentially, like, maybe you breed them and you use your profits off of breeding the first pistos that are a little more flexible, to look into like an RO unit, or afford your botanicals for a year worth of doing it in a tank, and then push forward to like, now I'm going to try the next set of pistos, and those are harder. They're more, they need that softer acidic water a bit more, right? There's options to do that will help. So it's funny, back-to-back comments. Stephen P. Monte Carlo is a jerk. Then Kelly Foreman. Monte Carlo has been a good friend to me. I feel like it's just totally the difference of a lot of people. Just like, Monte Carlo hates me versus Monte Carlo loves me. And it's just, a lot of it's our water, right? Oh, man. And then, Paul Solterra also mentions this, that like adding wood also helps, like driftwood and stuff, as it slowly, because it is slowly decaying over time, that will add humic substances, and that process will slowly acidify your water as well. So it's another way to kind of soften your water, is like a bunch of driftwood. Raphael, hey Bentley, what are your thoughts on paludariums? I'd like to make it my next challenge. So I actually think paludariums are crazy cool. I got an opportunity to meet Chris Team. I had to remember his first name. Chris Team, who he's like really big in the paludarium world, and he was here at AGA when it happened in 2019, and like, he's a super nice guy. We talked for, I think it was like 25 minutes or so, and I asked him some questions here and there, and we were talking back and forth, and it's one of those things where like, concepts of how paludariums are designed are actually what's going to play a lot into how I'm designing one of my display tanks when I can do my garage, which is going to be the way that I do my shell dweller tank. And that I've only told one person the grand plan about this, and that's Sean, the Shelly super nerd, because he's actually helping me source the specific Shelly I want, and I've kept that kind of on the hush because I want it to be a surprise. But a lot of like the methodologies of paludariums and some of the ways that plants grow in paludariums, like using things like ferns, are influencing the design that's in my head. But I personally don't know if I want to keep a paludarium. But that being said, I'll probably change my mind in like a year and end up having one, because I do think they're really cool, and I love vermilions. I think they're just a super cool plant. So I'll probably end up doing it just because I want to keep those plants for myself. Fishaholic. Local place to buy water wisteria here in the Pacific Northwest. I bought some plants online, all brown or shredded, so trying locally. Hello from Olympia. Well, I mean, tons of people inside the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society have it. I don't think Aquarium Co-op's been carrying water wisteria for a while. This Hygrophila deformis is the official name for it. But if all else fails, I could potentially get you some, because I have a ton of it. I float it all the time in my tanks. So I have lots of it that I literally just like throw in my compost bin. because I grow so much of it inherently using it as a nitrate absorber. So if all else fails, I might be able to get you some as I get some calmer weekends, hopefully a little later in the summer. Kelly Foreman. Bentley gave me the winning tip with Monte Carlo. Weight it with glass plates for a couple weights until it roots. That really made it take off. Yeah, this is a small trick that I was gonna save for another one of those like plant tip videos, but I'll tell you guys in stream. So I learned this from a aquascaping super nerd. Is that what a lot of the Japanese aquascapers were doing for a while? Is they'd plant all their Monte Carlo and then they'd get some thin glass plates and they'd lay them over the Monte Carlo carpet to hold it in place but let the light through, so that while it was rooting itself and converting and establishing itself, it was held in place so that the roots were forced to grab into the substrate. And then they would move it and let it finish growing so that their aquascape could get ready for pictures and stuff for competitions. Super smart. It's like one of those things where the person who told me that, and I just went, that's genius. They're like, oh no, I learned that from this person who learned it from Takeshi Mono. It's like all right, that's legit. And it's crazy, some of the weird little things you learn in this hobby if you just listen to enough people, right? You learn some cool stuff. Here's a great one. Quail's Aquarium Trick. We've talked about Extreme a bunch. I've never had any success with their famed krill flakes. Weird, I know, but I gave up on it. Some fish just don't like it. Some fish are not going to like certain things. They're used to a certain flavor. They're just not going to be big on it. I get it. My rainbows, they go hog wild for that stuff. It is nutso to watch that stuff. Cancer Drain, thoughts on Ken's fish foods? Haven't tried any of them yet. I will eventually. But yeah, I have so much fish food right now to go through that it'll be a while before I try anything new. And that's just because Extreme sent me a bunch of stuff to test out because they wanted my feedback. And they sent me all sorts of stuff. So I have to get through all that. And then, I had to a little care package that showed up from Fluval that included a bunch of bug bite flake, because I ranted and raved about how I loved it. So they sent me some more. It's kind of nice when you occasionally get a little bit of fish food. I mean, it's not like it was a ton, but it was nice little thing where they're like, hey, we're gonna send you this thing. Also, there's a little surprise in there for you, some flake food. And ooh. Paul Sothera, the biggest loss to the fish food menu is the original Sarah Onip tabs. Yeah, dude, I have a small stockpile left and I'm almost running out, and I'm gonna be really sad when they're gone because I love those things. Jerry Serpel Morris, I feed a mixture of foods but always end up throwing a pinch of each every day. Does that still count as varied? Heck yeah, man, a pinch of everything. Why not? This is great with that. I think having varied diets is really good, and Omar is mentioning the same thing. I preach that all the time. A varied diet is the best diet, and then asking me, have you ever tried the Dr. Bassler's foods? Same thing as Ken's fish. It's on my list of something I want to try just to see how my fish react to it. I mean, granted, it's kind of like cheating because rainbows just will eat anything. To be fair, there are a few foods they won't touch if it's too big for their throat for the most part, and they know that for certain because rainbows aren't the smartest fish in the world. But I've had other fish not touch certain things that I thought they would just go hog wild for. So, some of the Dr. Bassler stuff. There's Ken's fish. There's some stuff that Gemco carries. It's a veggie flake specifically that I want to try, but I have such a stockpile of food right now. and very recently there was a sale at a during the pandemic when they needed some extra kind of business. One of the fish stores that's really close to my house where I buy my frozen food did 20% off basically all of their foods, everything, dog food, cat food, everything. I went in and cleared them out of so much frozen food. So I have a freezer with a ton of frozen food sitting in it. And I feed frozen food really only about once a week. but I cleared them out. It's like, well, if you're gonna give me 20% off, and it was like all your Daphnia, all your this, all your this, all your this, just bought all of it because at that point it was like, okay, if I buy 4 packs and the 5th one is free. Well, when I buy foods, I tend to buy in bulk anyway, so now I might as well buy everything you've got and just be set for like, I don't know, 9 months. I bought a lot of frozen food. But also, I was helping my local fish store. I don't want to, I go to them specifically for a couple of things. Like I go by, for those that have dogs, bully sticks have like those rings style versions of them that, I think it's Red Barn makes them, is the manufacturer, is like the main one that I know of. Papa Limo, my corgi, loves those things. Where like my 2 girls, they like the standard, like just bigger bully sticks because they like they're taller than him. But for him, he loves those little ring ones. So I go specifically every once in a while and I'll buy him, 6 or 7 to like spread out over a while. And I go specifically to that store to get them, just because it's supporting that store and it's better than supporting, say, like a Petco or something like that. That's a big chain that gets lots of random people. I support my local store because it's just what I like to do. I like small business. What do you want from me? So, Raphael, am I a weirdo for not freaking out about snails, algae, unexpected critters? No, just a lot of people aren't. I think the more experience you get, the more you realize that, like, we're building miniature, like, biosystems, and this is all part of the system. It's all out there. It's how it survives. It's how things go. So make sure that you don't freak out about it because this is just nature, right? And I think the more that you stay in the hobby and you realize that, I think that helps. Certain people just don't like the look of things like snails or certain kinds of like, because you can get certain worms that live in substrates naturally that don't hurt your fish at all. I never freak out about that stuff. I think the only thing I've ever freaked out about was Hydra. And then I just realized, like, oh, if I just stop feeding brine shrimp and don't feed my fish for like 2 days, the Hydra dies. Because it's so reliant on a food source. And my fish all of a sudden go like, well, I'm not getting the food I want anymore. What's this stuff on the glass? Chomp. Get out of here. Mike Stambaugh, have you tried the fish food that Redfish Bluefish was showing on his live stream made out of mysis shrimp? So I had a phone call with Jason. And if for some reason he's watching, I apologize that I didn't get back to you on your phone call this weekend, buddy. But I was at work, very very late. No, we actually had a conversation about it. He was telling me some kind of like inside dirt on that food, basically just like details that he knows from working with the manufacturer. And it's basically the next time I go see him, I'm buying a bunch so that I can try it because it sounds really great. It's one of the things that's actually like catapulted itself very high on my I need to try this list. And a lot of that's just because also I'll support my friend's local business, right? As opposed to like random online shop that, even though Ken's Fish, for example, is great, don't get me wrong, I think they're a great business. It's just, that inherent want to help a local store, right? Can't help it. But yeah, I definitely want to try it because mysis shrimp, like, it's kind of like using krill or something like that. It's just such a naturally good protein source for fish that I inherently want to try something that's made from it. Stephen B., my wife got me into this hobby, so she's an enabler. Nice. Bring your lady on a live stream. That's up to her. So it's basically, I've talked to her before about that. Until she specifically asks me to be in something, I'm never going to ask her to be in anything. And a lot of that is my lady is very private. She is very, very private about a lot of her things. So she doesn't necessarily like want to be on camera, but she doesn't mind when I talk about her because I talk about her in a very like almost reverent way. And I think she likes that. But yeah, that's her decision. My mom has agreed to be in a video, which is, I think, will be fun. It's just when I can see her next because human malware is fun. But yeah, and then my cousin Henry, of course, we're trying to set something up where he comes back because he's a hoot. Also, he's like one of my favorite people in the whole wide world because he's just such a goofball and we have so much fun when we're together. But yeah, My lady will have to wait until she wants to. And that might be one of those things where, like, she might want to when we start doing a little bit more, because, like, she does a lot of my thumbnails, for those who don't know. Like, all the cool thumbnails, if it's not just, like, a boring screenshot from the video, anything that's cool and neat photography, that's all my girlfriend. She does all the, like, the rainbow fish one recently had, like, that rainbow background, a bunch of my Fluval light video ones, the JCMP one. She does all the photography and editing for those things. And it's just, like, one of her fun ways that she likes to use her artistic side to, like, help my channel. Plus, she's way better at making cool thumbnails than I am. So there's that. But yeah, she helps me with a bunch of thumbnails lately, and I think more and more as we get some stuff done, there might be a time where she decides she wants to, but that's up to her. And Joe Davis said, agreed, kudos to great wives. So far, my fish apartment has 3 tanks. Nice. Kelly Foreman, my boyfriend likes my tanks, but he cares far more about the pond snails than all my expensive rainbows. I had a friend over. That 90-gallon tank I talked about a while back, I gave it away, right? And I gave that to my friend Alyssa Bentley, the other member of Team Bentley, which more properly should be the true Team Bentley, because hers is the last name, mine's the first name, right? I'm just named for a car. But she came over, and her guy were moving the tank, and I was helping him some, and we're talking about, it's basically for their fancy goldfish, and one is like the fish that he's really attached to. He's not a super big fish person, but he's fallen in love with the one particular fancy goldfish. And yeah, it was all about, like, basically upgrading Fry was the name of the fish to the new, like, Fish Manson. It's like kind of fun, right? Just the little things that get interesting when your significant other, who might not be interested in fish naturally, takes a little interest in part of your hobby. Like, my lady loves Danger Noodle. Loves Danger Noodle. And we made a joke about potentially making a Twitter for Danger Noodle and making some kind of funny tweets that are, like, from the mind of Danger Noodle. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but it was just, like, something we joked about over the weekend when we were when I was doing some stuff around the house. Okay, we're getting super close to Dr. Black's stream, which he starts in, like, I don't know, 8-ish minutes. So let me give you a link to that just to make sure, if you want to keep rolling through for some sweet fish goodness. I'm always amazed at how, like, my YouTube search just, like, does not want to find his channel right away. It's incredible at times. But here's a quick link for that bad boy. My Aussie buddy. I'll answer, like, probably 2 more questions, and then we'll swing it so that Dr. Black can go live. If I do miss your question, or I missed it earlier, and for some reason I apologize, I apologize, but if for some reason I missed it, please, here's my email, bentley.pasco@gmail.com. I just put it in chat for a bunch of you. Feel free to email me. I typically get back to people in about 2 to 3 days. Sometimes it goes a little longer, depends on how busy I am at work. I've actually gotten pretty caught up on my mail recently. I think there's only, like, 1 more in my queue I have to go through. But, yeah. Yeah, if I miss your question, please shoot me an email. I get back to them. Just don't send me, like, immediate emergencies, just because, again, I have, like, a 2 to 3 day response time just because of work and what I do. So, yeah. Just don't send me the super emergencies. All right. Fishaholic, I will email you soon. My goldfish will thank you. Yeah. No, definitely. If all else fails, I'll be happy to give you some of my extras. It's just a matter of, like, getting schedules to line up. And I do drive down every once in a while. I drive down to, like, the Lacey area, so I won't be too far from Olympia. It's just kind of a if schedules line up, and I only go down there, like, once every 3 to 4 months, so it's not super common. Now you guys are learning about, like, random habits I have. Howard's Aquatics, who's got some Blaharii rainbows for sale and wants to ship. Dan's fish very regularly gets in really, really good Blaharii. Right now, I think he only has females left. But that would be the person I'd wait. I'd just wait for Dan to get his next, like, batch of rainbows in. He gets them straight from one of the people that goes out and like wild collects with people like Gary Lang and Johannes Graf and a lot of those people. So it's a really, really good source. It's actually the same Blahera I have right now, and they're just immaculate. They're gorgeous fish, and that would be where I would go because that's where I went. I bought mine from Dan. So yeah, there's that. Hope that helps on that one. It might be a little patience because you might not get it right now, but otherwise, there are some available on Aquabid from... I'm trying to remember what seller had them up. I don't want to look it up because Aquabid's like... For some reason, Aquabid is really slow to load at my house, but yeah, Aquabid has a couple of sellers that are selling them, and one of them is one of the better ones to go through. I can't remember whether it's Roseline 17 or All Oddball Aquatics. It might be one of the other people, but there's a couple of the good sellers are all selling right now. It might be LD Brown, actually, now that I think about it, or D Brown. It's one of the two. I can't remember which one he is on Aquabid, but good person to go to. All right, I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna get one last question, and then we're gonna kick this bad boy over to Dr. Black. Okay, make that 2 because this one's kind of short. E-Littles. Now that I have a Fluval 3.0, I blame you, Bentley. I wanted to ask, do you think using the siesta mode is bad, confusing for the fish? The fish don't really necessarily know. I mean, I'm sure some part of it messes with them, but for the people that have been doing it for years, they haven't noticed any like negative impact. I personally just don't like siestas. That's just me. But yeah, that's just how I roll. And the Chubby Guppy, as far as I'm concerned, all dojos are now danger noodles. It's so true. Like, once that name came out, it was just too good. It's just too good. Yeah, Kelly Foreman, thank you. LD Brown had Blaheri on Aquabid, which I've bought from D Brown, and those fish are fantastic. And D is a really, really good rainbow fish keeper and breeder, so there you go. Good option there. Thanks, Chubby Guppy, for the hippos. I actually watched a random short documentary about hippos. Well, I listened to it while I was doing some reporting at work today. All right, last question. Kyle's Aquarimetrics. It only took me like a month and a half to get your name right. Any new rainbow species you are planning to try? Yes. So it'll wait until I have my garage, just because I don't have space right now. But Hoon Aquatics, who's both a friend, local member of my club, and recently been doing a bit of YouTube, a lot of Instagram. His Instagram is great because he has great photography. He has the Melanotaenia species Tawa. So I'm going to get a bunch of Tawa from him. But beyond that, there's one other fish that I want to get a hold of that I don't have yet, and Dan's Fish regularly brings them in, and that's the Glossolepis species Giddaman. They're just like they're like an oil slick of color. It's so, you know what I'm talking about, right? When oil sits on the top of water and you get that just like rainbow sheen. That's what Giddaman is like. And man, they're just so cool looking that I want them, but I need tank space, right? And I need to be able to commit to them. There's several other fish like, I guess in a sense of, not necessarily new because I have them currently, but more that I haven't bred them yet and I want to breed them. That kind of for me is like new at the same time is because I'm doing something with a fish I haven't done yet. So, you know, there's kind of a mixture of both things. Like I have several kind of new fish as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, Dr. Black, iridescence, perfect word. But yeah, they're just, man, they're such a crazy looking fish. Although, a lot of their color is actually inherent to their scales. It's how they do it. I'll go find this real fast. Of course, I have to be able to type. Which, yeah. So there's this great photo from Gerd, who's like the man, the myth, the legend when it comes to a lot of rainbows. One sec. Just give me a sec, guys. I promise. It won't take me too much longer. Almost there. Takes a little bit when you're trying to do this on the fly with your programs. What the heck did this thing save to? Oh, geez. I saved this in like the worst place possible for myself. There it is. Got it. Oh, geez. It's so tiny. One sec. Check this guy out. This is Glossolepis species Gideman. And this is a photo by Gerd Bartz, who's, I think it's, yeah, Bartz, who's one of, like, the best, like, rainbow photographers out there. There's not many better. There's only a few, I would say, that are better, but he has great photography. But just look at that fish. As Kyle said, that's why they're called rainbows. Like, the iridescence of the color, you've got beautiful color in the finish that, like, fades into different colors. Like, how could you not look at that and just go, that's nice. Right? So that's probably the one species that I didn't buy previously from Dan because I knew I didn't have the space for it that I want. But other than that, yeah, it's basically from Hoon Aquatics. I'm going to get some Tawas. And there might be like one other species I pick up, but past that, most of my rainbow stuff is all going to be breeding projects. So that being said, guys, please, if you want to keep rolling through the streams, go check out Dr. Black. He's coming up next. As always, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome. And I hope you learned a little bit today in our happy philosophical conversation. Be looking forward to the videos this week. I think you're going to enjoy this one.